or what kind of got you into dealing specifically with retirement funds and plans like that for companies?
When I joined Morgan Stanley in 2000, I decided to focus on retirement plans for small businesses because there were a lot of changes. So I figured this would be a good way to make a good business out of it.
What's the best way to invest your money to get to that $1 million or potentially more?
When it comes to investing, I call it a three-legged stool. There are three parts to it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Ambition Circuit. I'm your host, Vedansh Sinha, and today we are going to be talking about cash, college, and the climb with our guest, Mr. Pankaj Dayal. Mr. Dayal, I'm going to hand it over to you to give a brief intro on yourself for our listeners.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Vedansh. Hello, everyone. This is Pankaj Dayal. My firm is PNR Financial Services, and I'm in a very specific area of the investment business. And I'm just very glad to be on this podcast with Vedansh.
And thank you so much for your time, Mr. Dayal. So to start off, I would like to ask you on the specifics of your specialty in the investment business and what exactly do you do?
So I work with businesses on helping them set up and run retirement plans for the business, where it does help the employer as well as the employees. And I help all participants in the plan also.
Awesome, that's cool. And just so I have an idea, what kind of companies are you working with? I mean, smaller firms, really, really large companies, or about how many employees would you say is kind of standard within these companies that you're working with?
I work with just about a startup business owner where they have no employees all the way up to 1,000 employees.
Wow, so you have a big range. That's nice to
Yes,
hear.
I can work with them. I'm independent, so I work with companies like ADP, Paychex, and Fidelity, Vanguard, and that's the reason I'm independent, so I can work with all the
Kind of,
major service providers.
yeah, nice, nice. I noticed also that you tend to do a lot of kind of volunteering and give back to society a lot, which I think is really cool. It's a nice balance. And so I'd like to commend you for that. I think that's very respectable, very cool, and definitely something I would love to get into.
Thank you. Yes, it is a good way of giving back, and you do get to network with quite a few people, so it's always a good thing. Yep.
I'm sure, I'm sure. So, kind of just beginning the official questions. Now that we know you kind of have a career in investments and in retirement funds and such, what got you into that career, or what kind of got you into dealing specifically with retirement funds and plans like that for companies?
So that's a great question because that brings back memories of my first career. I was a civilian member. I was with the NYPD, and when I
Awesome.
left there, I had a retirement plan, which is called a pension, which is, by the way, going away now because it is quite expensive for employers to offer those kinds of plans. So when I
Wow.
joined Morgan Stanley in 2000, I decided to focus on retirement plans for small businesses because there were a lot of changes, and that's what I gave up. So I figured this would be a good way to make a good business out of it.
Awesome. I love the entrepreneurial mindset. That's excuse me, that's definitely interesting, being able to kind of combine social issues you see with a very business mind. So I like that.
Yes, absolutely. See, actually, when I started with the NYPD back in 1982, I
Mhm.
was young and green. I had no idea what was going on. And I had somebody that sat me down and said, "Hey, you need to pay attention to this." And I was only in my 20s, so it was a great time for me to get that education. So I've never forgotten that.
And you know what? I would say that that person is very smart because even nowadays, almost 40 years later, that's something I've heard too from a lot of people elder to me talking about, what you do with your work and your fulfillment is very important, but it's very important to have a plan for the future in terms of what you're going to do after you stop working or even after you can't work. And so it's cool how that advice has been relevant over all these decades.
Absolutely, yes. Mhm.
And that kind of segues into my next question. where a lot of people do actually think that, retirement plans and retirement funds are something they have to worry about much later, maybe in their 40s, even 50s. But why would you say it's really important to start as early as possible, even in your 20s, if you could?
The younger you are, the more time you have, and there is something called power of compounding. And that is, the more time you have, the more chances are that even at a lower rate of return. So there's something called the rule of 72. I'm sure you've heard of that, but
Hmm.
it takes 72 to double your money. So if you're someone in your 20s and you put away whatever amount you can, obviously the more is the better. The younger you are, the more you put
The
away.
more you put away, yeah.
And regardless of what the rate of return, but say it's a modest 7% rate of return, it would take you 10 years to double your money. It's as simple as that. And
Wow.
that's where the time factor comes in, because the more time you have, if you're in your 20s and are going to retire at the age of 60, then you have about 40 years or at least 30 years or more for that money to grow. And that's why it's important for you to consider something in your 20s and not when you're older.
Which is cool. And this one I know is kind of off topic a little bit, but since we are kind of delving into a financial conversation, I think a big stigma that I've seen, at least when I was growing up, is that people are very conservative with their money in the sense that they never truly want you to know how much they have, which is respectable, but they also don't want to give you any advice as to how much you should have. And I think that's really dangerous when you're a young adult trying to navigate the world by yourself because A, you don't know how much things cost, and B, you don't know how to budget for things because you're not even sure how much you'll earn. So knowing that that stigma is kind of something from the past, and hopefully we're trying to break it, how much would you say someone needs right now if they wanted to retire at 50 or if they wanted to retire at 55 or 60 or even 65?
Well, that would depend on their lifestyle. So I know I'm sure you've heard of the book called The Millionaire Next Door. And
Yes.
I can relate to at least five such examples of actual families that I have dealt with. And the reason I'm giving you, sorry, it's a longer answer, but it depends on your lifestyle. So if you're someone like that, where these people lived in a very simple lifestyle, in a very simple home, had all the bare necessities, but nothing
Hmm.
extra, you can get away with maybe $1 million. But if you are someone who wants to travel or wants to live a better quality of life or what have you, then obviously that's what you would have to at least budget for, or account for or plan for.
And what's the best way to invest your money to get to that $1 million or potentially more? Because I know nowadays, with at least the kind of wages we're seeing on average in America, it might even take more than 40 or 50 years to save up $1 million just off of your paychecks alone.
Yes, it can. But see, there are, when it comes to investing, there, I call it a three-legged stool. There are three parts to it. One is asset allocation. So you have your basic investments are cash. Obviously, cash is cash. Then you have your stocks and bonds. Those are your basic investments. Now, what part of it do you want of your total portfolio do you want in cash? How much in stock? How much in bonds? It's up to you. And that is based on your risk tolerance and the appetite for the market to go up and down, which is your risk tolerance. And
Mhm.
the longer the time you have, the more aggressive you could be. But either way, it is your asset allocation. Then the step two is to diversify. So even if you have a stock portfolio, there are so many different types of stocks that you need to know about, and you have to be diversified in order for you to get a decent rate of return from them. And the third part is to rebalance on a regular basis. So I believe you should look at your portfolio on a regular basis, but at least once a year you should be rebalancing. Too frequent also, I believe, is not good. But this is the three-legged stool that I do believe if you follow, you are going to get a decent rate of return.
And I like how you mentioned kind of being able to play more aggressively when you start younger, because that is a common theme I've seen across, all of the guests I've interviewed so far. And even people I've talked to in general, their thing is that they wish they started earlier just so they had more time to take risks. Another
Yes.
thing I would like to ask is you mentioned kind of annual rebalancing of your portfolio. So could you kind of delve into specifically what that means?
So say you have a your cash is cash. So
Yeah.
when it comes to your retirement accounts and all that, I would just say you open a regular bank account and leave your cash portion in the regular bank account. So if we were to focus only on the stocks and bonds part of it, say you have an asset allocation of 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio.
Yeah.
Come January 1, you have, at 60/40 is where you start. Now, these are different kinds of asset classes, so the rates of return are going to be different. Come December 31st, you may have a 70/30 or a 50/50 or whatever the case may be, but that is what you're now doing. Go back in and rebalance and bring it back to your 60/40 or whatever
Okay.
your asset allocation is. And
Hmm.
that's the rebalancing portion of it.
Settling back to your original ratio.
Right.
Got it.
And the younger you are, the more aggressive, as I mentioned. But as you get older, your asset allocation is also going to be a little bit more conservative because you now have less time for that portfolio to grow and you cannot afford so much volatility, especially if there's a down cycle in the market, which can last anywhere from 5 to 7 years. Then
Hmm.
at that time you don't want to be caught without that part of it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. So, then what are some really big financial planning mistakes that you see younger people tend to make? And what kind of steps can they take to avoid them?
The biggest mistake I see is lack of planning and lack of understanding. There's unfortunately there are tools out there, but you do have to go. Today is a little different. It's actually there's quite a few more tools available than the time when I started. Uh,
Hmm.
but either way, educating your oneself on what is a stock, what is a bond, what is an investment, because I keep hearing a lot of times I get on these kinds of podcasts and people talk about ETFs or certain stocks or certain
Yeah.
mutual funds. It is important for you because, after all, it is your money. It is important for you to understand what these investments are, how they work, what the pluses and minuses of each investment are. So if you
Hmm.
are someone, say, who is very astute and is going to be hands on your portfolio, then you obviously may want to consider individual equities. But if you are someone who is more of a passive investor and all you want to do is have the money available at a reasonable rate of return,
Hmm.
maybe mutual funds are good for you. If you are someone who is concerned about the cost in the investment, maybe exchange traded or ETFs could be a good vehicle for you. But the more you educate yourself, the earlier you start, is the better off you're going to be in the long run.
I like that, but I feel like nowadays a lot of what the issue is that people don't really want to start when they're so young because they feel like they have less money. And they would rather wait until they are 30, 40 years old making six figures, and they want to invest a bigger chunk, more money at once instead of smaller amounts. So, how do you kind of combat that, and what would your advice be if someone does want to invest but they don't have that much money?
You start small. It doesn't have to be, you can do maybe $50 a paycheck. You don't have to have that $1 million to begin with. You could do small amounts. To give you an example, when I started in the business, an IRA, the limit was only $2,000. Today it's up at
Wow,
7,000,
7,000,
but
yeah.
back then it was only 2,000. So that's the maximum you could have put away anyway. So it didn't matter, you know but it doesn't matter how much. The biggest thing is to start. So you can start with $50 a paycheck or whatever. If the more you can afford, obviously the better off you are, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be those large amounts.
Okay, that's cool. So always start small. And
Yeah.
then another thing I feel like nowadays is we're seeing so many changes in like healthcare coverage and insurance rates and things like that. And I know a lot of companies fund them some more than others, some may not fund it all. What do you think Gen Z people entering the workforce should look for in a typical benefits package to ensure that they are getting the most out of their paycheck instead of having to spend on things that maybe other companies would be willing to cover for them?
So that's great question, and that's one thing you always want to look at is what are the benefits package. And if I were to use my own example, as I had mentioned, I used to work for the city of New York. I
Mhm.
have a pension. But if I were to talk about the funding of the pension, it costs the employer anywhere from 15 to 20% over and above a person's salary to fund that pension. Either
Wow.
way, it is important whether they do any kind of match. Today, most companies offer a 401k, and usually they have health coverage of some sort or the other. And you do want to look at all these options because no matter what, I come across, I work with a lot of people on H1 visa that are here temporary, and they don't
Hmm.
know if they're going to be here next week, next year, five
Yeah.
years from now, but it's irrelevant. So when you look at, don't only look at the salary. Some companies give you a great salary up front, but there are no other benefits. Maybe a company that's offering benefits but is paying you 20% less, maybe it's a better buy because you are now getting those benefits.
Those benefits.
So,
Yeah.
health insurance and retirement plans, I believe, are the two biggest benefits that you want to look for. Paid time off is another thing, sick time, these are all benefits that you do want to look for. A lot of companies don't offer a lot of that, but most of the major companies do offer a good benefits package. And
Yeah.
you have to really evaluate that.
That's cool. So, knowing that you've just given a lot of advice to a lot of current young people, if you could step into a time machine and go back, what's, one or maybe even two pieces of advice that you would absolutely want to give to your 20-year-old self?
So again, as I mentioned, with the pension, so I did not have to worry about the pension part of it. But for us civil service employees, we had something called a 457 plan. And
Hmm.
I was contributing to it. But if there is one thing I could go back and change, that's what I would have done. I would have started maxing out on that pension plan or on the 457 plan, because that was going to be my money that I'm going to defer from my salary into the
Hmm.
plan. And I was allowed back then, I believe the number was about $7,500. So again, as I said, I was contributing, but not enough. And
Not
that's
enough.
one thing I would want to change if I could do over.
Okay, that's cool. Well, you know what? This was very informative, and I feel like a lot of your advice is something I've heard before, but it's very nice to see someone provide real life examples, especially with, their industry and their numbers. And I do thank you for that because, like I said before,
Oh,
a lot of people are very private with it, which I can understand, but
which
then
is
it
fine.
doesn't
You
really
don't have
younger
to
people.
share. You don't have to share your financials. When I work with businesses, whether it's the owner of the business or the employees, I never ask those personal questions, but I give them the guidelines so they know their situation. And it is important. And one thing I did not mention about the benefits package, some companies have high deductible health plans.
Hmm.
If you have a company like that, maybe a health savings account or any kind of flexible spending account or something, these are again benefits that you want to look for because they could be very helpful. In your total financial picture, they could be very helpful for you.
Awesome. That's great. So then basically kind of to sum up what we've discussed maybe over the last 20 minutes, is you would say anytime you're investing, always start sooner than later, even if it's a small amount, because you have more time to take risk and that money has more time to compound. Two
Absolutely.
would always be weigh your options, always look at even if you're maybe getting less money upfront, where you're getting more benefits, because in the long run, that's going to help you more. And three, always make sure you understand what you're investing in, how you're investing, and make sure that you're investing something you truly believe in and not something someone else believes in, because at the end of the day, it's your money.
Exactly. Most defined contribution, not most, every defined contribution plan is your money that you're putting in. Some employers do give a match, and I'll give you an example of doing this or starting early. My son,
Hmm.
every generally every June, he comes and says to me, Dad, I have already maxed out on my 401k. Okay, and
Wow.
that he is done in June for the whole year.
The whole year,
Whether
yeah.
his employer, he's had some employers that have given him a match, some have not. It doesn't matter, but he has always tried to max out on his 401k, and he's generally done by around June, in the middle of the year. Once you're done with that, another thing you could do is maybe a Roth IRA. If you have
Hmm.
children, you can plan for their future with, you can do, there are different kinds of accounts, but one of them, if you want to put money away for their education, there are 529
Nine
plans.
accounts,
I know we're
yes.
dealing with a much younger audience, so it's a little bit different, but nonetheless, these are all the tools. So my two recommendations to any audience, young or old, it's irrelevant. The more you understand, the better off you are. So you need to educate yourself. There's so many resources out there that you can find. And today, the internet gives you just about any tool you need, it's out there. So
Yeah,
educate yourself. The more you understand what the investment is, how it works, what the return rates of return you can expect from any kind of investment. I see people that are gung ho on real estate. Real estate is just another asset class.
class,
So
yes.
if it should be part of one's portfolio, but should it be all of it? I don't think so.
No.
But it should be a part of the portfolio. So education is one, and the younger you are, the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be. And at least work with, you don't need to share all your financial details with anyone. Work with a professional or
Hmm.
go online and educate yourself, but get an idea what are some of the things you should be. One thing we did not talk about is life insurance. Now,
Yeah,
I have seen people that have had life insurance, and because of which their families, you as the insured, are never going to be taking benefit from a life
from a life
insurance
insurance
policy,
plan. Yeah,
but it is going to be good for your beneficiaries. God forbid something happens to you prematurely. So life insurance is another part of the financial planning process. How
yeah.
how much you need and what they, these are things that where you educate yourself, and if you need to talk with professionals, and there are plenty of good professionals. Don't sign on anything till you understand what you're signing on, but at least pick their brains, get ideas, and if there are good professionals, they're going to spend the time necessary to work with you to give you a good education on that.
Awesome. And I think it's cool also talking about life insurance because, especially because I am kind of targeting Gen Z audience with this podcast, a lot of us don't really think it's worth it. But again, you never know what could happen to you. And God forbid anything does, you at least want to keep your family, your loved ones, your beneficiaries in any capacity, well suited in that event.
Yes,
And so I
you
love that you
you
brought that
are a
up.
young audience, but here's why I feel someone who is 18 years old is the best person to get life insurance, because they are in their prime of their health. Once they
Mhm.
turn 18, the rating for them is based on their life expectancy, and because of which, if they have a good health history and whatnot, they're going to get the best possible premiums. But where life insurance really comes into play is once you have a family, you get married, you have children, what have you. Now you have people that are depending on you. That's where life insurance becomes very important. Another
Yeah.
time insurance can come into play is when you are much, much older and you have a large estate that you have accumulated. It could help you with your estate planning. A life insurance policy can come in handy. Sometimes business owners can use a life insurance policy on what we call buy sell agreements. Those are
Mhm.
times when it can be a very good tool in the planning process, but it has to be done correctly. And the only way it can be done is the more you educate yourself. But insurance plays a very important part in one's financial planning. Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. I love that. And then, with that being said, is there anything you'd like to ask me?
I know I commend you for what you are doing. When I saw your post, I was like, wow, I really want to be part of his podcast just so that I can help him get started and moving. And I really wish you all the best. I hope you find a lot of great, successful people that you can talk to, learn from their life experiences, which I think is going to be great for your education journey. And I
Thank you.
sincerely
Thank you
wish you
so
all the
much.
best.
Thank you so much. And I would also love to thank you for your time. And with that
My
being said and
pleasure.
done, with that being said and done, that is another episode of the Ambition Circuit, you guys. Thank you for joining me and my lovely guest, Mr. Dayal, here today. Wish you guys all the best and stay tuned for more episodes. Bye.
Take care.